January 31st, 1945. Clark Air Base, Luzon, Philippines. The midday sun hammered down on the tarmac, the temperature hovering near 35 degrees Celsius. Major Frank T. McCoy wiped the sweat from his forehead as he approached the aircraft that would change everything he thought he knew about Japanese aviation. McCoy was no amateur. At 34, he had spent 3 years examining enemy wreckage across the Pacific, from the coral atolls of the Solomons to the jungles of New Guinea. He'd crawled through the burned-out husks of Zeros, dissected the remains of Nakajima bombers, catalogued engine components from dozens of crashed aircraft, but nothing in his extensive experience had prepared him for what he was about to discover. Tail number 763-12 sat before him, a Mitsubishi G4M bomber in remarkably pristine condition. It wasn't battle-damaged wreckage. It was a complete, functional aircraft, seemingly abandoned intact during the chaotic Japanese retreat. The distinctive cigar-shaped fuselage spanned almost 20 meters. The 25-meter wingspan cast a shadow across the concrete. McCoy climbed onto the wing's surface. His fingers found the inspection panel latches. They opened easily. No locks, no elaborate security. What he saw inside made him freeze. The fuel tanks were completely, utterly exposed. No self-sealing material, no protective armor plating, no fire suppression systems. Just a minimal 2mm layer of aluminum, barely thicker than a soda can, separating thousands of liters of high-octane aviation fuel from the outside world. He opened panel after panel. Every single fuel cell showed the same absence of protection. This wasn't damage. This wasn't a field modification. This was intentional, original design. The flying cigar suddenly made perfect sense, and so did the catastrophic loss rates Japanese bomber crews had suffered since 1942. This was physical evidence of a fundamentally different calculus of war, one that valued operational range over crew survival. The story of this fatal compromise began in Tokyo, 1937. The Imperial Japanese Navy's Bureau of Aeronautics issued specifications that seemed almost impossible. A land-based attack bomber, capable of carrying 800 kilograms of bombs across a combat radius of 2,400 kilometers. Maximum speed, 400 kilometers per hour. Crew, 7 men. No existing bomber in the world could achieve this combination. American bombers like the B-17 prioritized defensive armament and protection. British bombers focused on payload capacity. The Japanese Navy wanted something entirely different, the ability to project air power across the vast distances of the Pacific. Mitsubishi Heavy Industries received the contract. The lead designer, Honjo Kiro, immediately confronted the fundamental problem: weight. The range requirement was so extreme that the aircraft would need to carry nearly its own empty weight in fuel. Every kilogram mattered. Honjo's calculations were brutally clear. To achieve the required range, the aircraft would need approximately 4,780 liters of fuel. That fuel weighed over 3,400 kilograms. Something had to be sacrificed. Western air forces had already made their choice. Self-sealing fuel tanks were mandatory. The technology used layers of rubber compounds that would swell when punctured, automatically sealing holes and preventing fuel leakage. The system wasn't perfect, but it dramatically improved crew survival. The problem was weight. A complete self-sealing fuel system would add over 500 kilograms. With protection systems installed, the aircraft couldn't meet the range requirement. The fuel load would have to be reduced by approximately 800 liters, cutting the operational radius by nearly 1,000 kilometers. Honjo made the decision that would define the aircraft's legacy: eliminate protection entirely. Every gram of weight would be devoted to fuel capacity and engines. Crew protection was sacrificed for operational capability. The first prototype took flight in October 1939. Test results were extraordinary. Over 6,000 kilometers range unloaded, easily exceeding specifications. Speed topped 428 kilometers per hour. The Navy was delighted. Production began immediately. By April 1941, operational units received their G4M bombers. The aircraft's capabilities seemed revolutionary. Japanese naval air power could now strike anywhere across the Pacific. But the veterans noticed the absence of protection immediately. They said nothing officially. You didn't question Navy specifications. But the knowledge was there. This was a bomber designed to reach distant targets, not to survive determined fighter opposition. December 8, 1941. Hours after Pearl Harbor, 82 G-4M and 26 G-3M bombers took off from Formosa, targeting Clark Field in the Philippines. The strike achieved total surprise. Arriving at 12:35 p.m. from an altitude of 20,000 feet, the formation unleashed 636 bombs across the American base. Of the 17 B-17 flying fortresses on the ground, 12 were instantly destroyed. Nearly every P-40 Warhawk was eliminated. In 45 minutes, American air power in the Philippines was neutralized. The Betty bombers escaped without a scratch, having struck from 460 miles away, a distance exceeding any American bomber's capability. 2 days later came an even more dramatic demonstration. On December 10th, 26 G-4M bombers attacked British Force Z, centered on the battleship HMS Prince of Wales and battlecruiser HMS Repulse. The coordinated torpedo attack was devastating. Both capital ships were sunk within 2 hours, costing 841 British lives. For the first time in history, actively defended capital ships were sunk solely by aerial attack on the open sea. Winston Churchill would later write, "In all the war, I never received a more direct shock." Through early 1942, the Betty seemed omnipresent. On February 19th, 1888 Japanese aircraft, including 27 G-4Ms, struck Darwin, Australia, flying from bases in Timor, 1,500 miles distant. Between March and July, Betty bombers from Rabaul hammered Port Moresby with near-daily raids across 600 miles of jungle and mountains. The bombers' extraordinary range meant Allied forces couldn't strike back. Rabaul was beyond the range of Allied fighters and bombers. The tactical asymmetry was complete. But this advantage depended entirely on minimal opposition. As American fighter strength increased and pilot proficiency improved, everything was about to change. August 8, 1942. 23 G-4M bombers from the 4th Air Group departed Rabaul for Guadalcanal, 600 miles southeast. The mission was routine. They'd flown similar raids dozens of times. But this time, American intelligence had advance warning. Marine F-4F Wildcat fighters from Henderson Field intercepted the formation over Savo Island. What followed was a massacre. Captain Marion Carl, leading the Marine fighters, described the engagement. "We came at them from high and ahead. The moment our rounds hit their wings, they just exploded. I'd never seen anything like it. One burst, maybe 2 seconds of fire, and the whole aircraft became a fireball." In the savage air battle, 18 of the 23 Betty bombers were destroyed. Approximately 120 Japanese airmen died, the single worst G-4M loss of the campaign. The 5 bombers that escaped did so only by jettisoning their bombs and fleeing at maximum speed. American pilots consistently observed the same terrifying flaw. The Betty would ignite and explode with minimal hits. 2 or 3 rounds anywhere in the wing were sufficient. The .50 caliber rounds would punch through the thin aluminum, strike the unprotected fuel tanks, and the volatile aviation gasoline would ignite instantly. The aircraft earned grim nicknames that spread through fighter squadrons: Flying Cigar, One-Shot Lighter, and Flying Zippo, all referring to its fatal tendency to burst into flames. Ensign James Sweat, who shot down 7 Japanese aircraft in a single mission, later recalled, "The Betty was the easiest kill in the Pacific. Hit the wing anywhere and it was over. The whole thing would light up like a torch." The tactical situation had completely reversed. Now it was American fighters operating from forward bases and Japanese bombers running a gauntlet of interceptors. The losses mounted horrifically. Between August and October 1942, over 100 G-4M bombers were destroyed over Guadalcanal alone. Approximately 700 Japanese airmen died in those 3 months. The true extent of the vulnerability wasn't confirmed until American forces secured intact examples in November 1942 at Buna, New Guinea. Technical Sergeant Robert Hayes opened the wing panels and immediately understood. There was nothing there. Just thin metal and the fuel cells. Every American bomber had layers of protection. This had absolutely nothing. The analysis confirmed it was deliberate design. American bombers like the B-17 and B-24 featured self-sealing fuel tanks as standard, adding over 500 kilograms that was considered essential for crew survival. The Japanese primary bomber operated without it. The weight saved enabled exceptional range, but the cost in crew losses was catastrophic. Lieutenant Fujita Iyozo, a Betty pilot with the Takao Air Group, wrote to his family in October 1942, "We call our aircraft the Hamaki, the cigar. Every mission, we joke about who will light up today. But it's not really a joke. Yesterday, Tanaka's aircraft took a single hit during the bomb run. We watched it fall. The fire was visible from 2 kilometers away. 7 men. I knew every one of them. Unlike American bomber crews, who knew their aircraft was designed to bring them home even after heavy damage, Japanese crews understood that survival depended entirely on avoiding hits. There were no wounded Bettys limping back to base. You either returned untouched, or you didn't return at all." Petty Officer Kawasaki Hiroshi, a Betty gunner, kept a diary recovered after the war. Third mission to Guadalcanal. 14 aircraft departed, 9 returned. The Americans are everywhere now. We're not flying bombers anymore. We're flying coffins that happen to have wings. Some crews attempted makeshift solutions. They requisitioned rubber matting and tried to install it beneath the fuel tanks. Others hung their flak vests near the wing roots, hoping to provide minimal protection. These field modifications were largely ineffective. The vulnerability was too fundamental. Lieutenant Commander Takahashi Kakuichi, a decorated leader, wrote a report in late 1942. "The G4M is operationally obsolete. We cannot sustain these loss rates. Every mission is ending in death. We need protected aircraft, or we need to stop flying." The report was ignored. Japan's industrial capacity was already stretched. Redesigning the Betty would take years. The crews would have to accept the risk. By mid-1943, the survival rate for Betty crews on the Rabaul-Guadalcanal run dropped below 30% for completing 30 missions. Most crews didn't complete their tours. They died in flames over the Solomon Sea. Warrant Officer Saito Masao, one of the few to survive the entire Guadalcanal campaign, reflected years later. "We knew. Everyone knew. We were dying because someone decided our lives were worth less than a few hundred kilograms of weight savings. That's what our range cost. Blood." The Betty's vulnerability was underscored by 2 symbolic moments. On April 18, 1943, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, architect of Pearl Harbor, was flying in a G4M from Rabaul to Bougainville when American P-38 Lightnings intercepted his aircraft. First Lieutenant Rex Barber described the engagement. "We came in from below and behind. I fired a long burst into the wing root and engine. The bomber immediately caught fire. I mean instantly. The whole wing was burning. There was zero possibility of survival. Yamamoto and his entire staff died in the crash. The unprotected fuel tanks that gave the Betty its range also ensured that even Japan's most important military leader couldn't be safely transported." More dramatically, on March 21, 1945, 18 Bettys carrying Oka rocket bombs set out to strike American ships off Okinawa. The Oka, essentially a manned missile, was suspended beneath each Betty's fuselage. The weight and drag reduced the Betty's already marginal performance catastrophically. American radar detected the formation 60 miles out. Hellcat fighters intercepted them long before release point. What followed was systematic slaughter. The Bettys, hindered by their external payload, couldn't evade. They couldn't defend. They certainly couldn't survive hits. American pilots destroyed the entire formation. Not a single Betty survived to release its weapon. 137 bomber crew and 15 Oka pilots died. The mission failed completely. It was the ultimate demonstration of the Betty's fundamental flaw. An aircraft so vulnerable, it couldn't survive long enough to complete its mission, even on a one-way suicide attack. Major McCoy's examination at Clark Field provided the final technical confirmation. His report detailed how eliminating protection systems saved over 500 kilograms, translating directly into extended range. But this created a critical failure point. Any hit in the wing area meant near certain destruction. The comparative analysis was stark. A B-17G weighed 16,391 kilograms empty, more than twice the Betty's 6,741 kilograms. Much of that additional weight was devoted to crew protection. The B-17's combat loss rate in the Pacific was approximately 3% per mission. The Betty's loss rate in contested airspace exceeded 15%, 5 times higher. By 1943, Japan experienced critical aircrew shortages. The training pipeline couldn't replace losses. Replacement crews received abbreviated training, sometimes 6 months instead of 18. These inexperienced crews, flying aircraft offering no margin for error, died even faster. The final symbolic mission occurred on August 19, 1945. 2 white-painted G-4M bombers, marked with green crosses, carried the Japanese surrender delegation from Japan to Hiroshima. The bomber that had opened the Pacific War by destroying American air power at Clark Field now concluded it by carrying the delegation of defeat. Total production reached 2,414 aircraft. Approximately 1,200 were destroyed in combat, consumed by the fires the design made inevitable. Conservative estimates suggest at least 10,000 Japanese aircrew died flying the G-4M. A Betty crew member's chance of surviving 30 combat missions was less than 30%. American B-17 crews in Europe, facing intense German defenses, had approximately 60% survival rates. The examination of tail number 763-12 at Clark Field confirmed the ultimate truth. Japanese designers achieved exactly what 1937 specifications demanded: unrivaled range and speed. But the cost was measured in human lives. The unprotected fuel tanks were not an error. They were a deliberate choice, made at the highest levels of Japanese military planning. A choice that prioritized capability over survivability. A choice that accepted catastrophic casualties as the price of operational range. American forces designed aircraft to bring crews home. The B-17, the B-24, all featured protection systems that added weight and reduced range. But those systems saved lives. Crews survived damage, returned home, accumulated experience, trained replacements. Japanese forces designed aircraft to reach targets, regardless of cost. The Betty achieved its mission parameters perfectly. It could strike at distances no other bomber could match. But the crews who flew it were expendable. In the end, the nation that valued the crew built a force that endured. American bomber crews flew multiple tours. Their experience accumulated. Their air force grew stronger. The nation that accepted catastrophic casualties built a force that destroyed itself through attrition. Japanese Betty crews died faster than replacements arrived. Experience was lost with every burning aircraft. The Air Force grew weaker with every mission. This single bomber, tail number 763-12, provided irrefutable evidence of this fatal calculation. Major McCoy's analysis documented the same conclusion. Japan built an extraordinary bomber by accepting losses no Western military would tolerate. The Betty's story is not just about engineering. It's about the fundamental values that nations bring to war. It's about what we're willing to sacrifice in pursuit of victory. The Americans chose to protect their crews. The Japanese chose to maximize capability. History rendered its verdict in the wreckage of 1,200 Betty bombers scattered across the Pacific floor, each one a tomb for 7 men whose lives were traded for range.